Hey, have you ever tried playing Valorant with wall hacks? Well, I hope not, because you'd hopefully be banned by now. But believe it or not, there are certain agents that actually give you wall hacks while playing the game. And the two that immediately come to mind are Cypher and Sova for most people. Sova and his arrows and his drone basically give you the freest information in the world, and Cypher with his camera and trips make it so that you can see enemies for sometimes even longer than Sova's utility. It's pretty nuts. So today we're going to talk about everybody's favorite white fedora sentinel, Cypher. Now, many people in the community agree that Cypher can be very difficult to play because of his 100 setups. And in order to learn this agent, you have to spend a ton of time in custom games, figuring out different tripwires, cameras, one-ways, and all of this can be super time consuming. And then once you learn these setups, you have to practice playing around them, repositioning yourself and all that, weaving your way in and out of cages, and using your camera to gain information as to what enemies are pushing where. So to save you some time, we at SkillCapped have decided to put a few good Cypher setups for each site on each map all into one video. So sit back, grab your notebook, and get ready to learn how to play like a ready Cypher main. To start things off, we're going to Haven. Cypher's super important on this map because there's 3 bomb sites and just a lot of ground to cover. So with that being said, Cyphers usually put 1 tripwire in B and 1 in garage, and they keep another one for the site that they're playing on. But that doesn't mean that sometimes you can't set up some dirty combinations on site. On A side, there's a few setups that work really well. For starters, I think that throwing 1 tripwire into short as the round starts and swinging off it can be really good and get you a pretty easy kill. Just make sure you throw a tripwire in long to cover your back and place a cage right here so that in case you are pushed really hard, you can isolate short and take 1v1s. Another setup that I like to do is I throw my camera deep into short on this wall so that I can see people as they run through and tell my teammates how many people are here. And then I'll double tripwire long. People sometimes expect the first tripwire, but they never expect the second. With this setup, you can play backside or in heaven, and from there you can spray through your cages to people charging in from long, or take aim duels from people coming out of short. For our last setup on A site, you can throw your tripwires from 100 different angles off this box. These isolate the back of sight, and usually people just run into them. I recommend you play near CT or in heaven so you don't get overrun so easy. You can play on site, just be sure to hit your shots or have someone playing alongside you, because if you die, your utility is basically wasted. But something I think that's fun to do is that if you do play in heaven, pick up an Odin and you can wallbang people as they run through your tripwires. As for other camera spots, A site has a ton. Throw these 3 for information as they're pushing the site. Use this one to spot short and see past those pesky Cypher cages that block the cross. You can also use this one to spot for long. Next, let's move on to B site. Now, there's a ton of goofy tripwires you can throw in this site, but I think that B site is usually pretty easy to retake. So most of the time, you should just throw a tripwire in here and tell your teammates if somebody breaks it. Or you can throw a camera on top from these boxes and play retake from it and gather a ton of information. But if you really want to play B, here are some of the crazy tripwires you can mix and match on site. For our last site, we're going to combine garage and C. Usually, I like to always put a tripwire in garage for my teammate holding it, which leaves me another one for site. I'll usually put it on the entrance and throw this one way so that I can spray people down as they're pushing my site. If the enemy team is favoring C a ton, you could throw 2 of any of these tripwires, play on platform or logs, place your cages in a way so that you're protected, and shoot anyone who wants to walk through them. Just be sure to shoot some Sova darts that fly over your head, because if you don't, you're going to get mowed down pretty fast. As for cameras, there's several that you can throw depending on what your game plan is for the round. Throw this one if you're playing on site, as it also sees in the garage and tells you when they're pushing the site. Use this one to catch early information as soon as the body barrier drops. And this one allows for early flanks if you spot no one. And lastly, place this one if you plan on playing retake, as it gathers the most information for your team before the retake starts. Now, before we get into the rest of the guide, I just want to say that if you're looking on guides for every other agent, we have those as well at SkillCapped.com. We have Smurf commentaries where Radiant level players talk you through their games and show you how to get the most out of agents like Cypher. Or maybe if you wanted to learn how to play another complex agent like Sova, we can help you with that too. We also have a rank improvement guarantee, so that if you don't see your rank improving, you'll get your money back. But there's literally so much value here, I find it hard that you won't improve. If you're looking for the fastest way to climb in Valorant, be sure to check out SkillCapped.com, link in the description below. So let's take a dive into Valorant's newest map, Fracture. Believe it or not, Cypher has a ton of different setups that you can mix and match depending on how you want to play the round. As for A site, here are some great camera spots you can switch between. This one is great at watching rope in A main, and we have some one-ways we'll show you in a bit that works great with this camera. This camera is a bit better to watch drop, but keep in mind that most teams shouldn't be pushing through this area, as it's a lot easier to get funneled and picked off one by one. But in case they do, here's a one-way for drop. And also, this is an interesting camera for A main. I don't know how useful it is, but I've used it a few times when enemies don't go there immediately, and it hasn't gotten shot out, and I've gotten a lot of information with it. Okay, so now let me show you some more one-ways. This one's great for A main, while this one is great for ropes. If you're fighting for rope control, this is probably the most important one-way you'll use, as no one can really push you that well if you're using it. And this one on A main is pretty great, as it simply just blocks people from taking the site. Pair these with a few tripwires, and you're pretty good to go. As for B site, here's a great one way for B main. Just line it up like so. You're going to want to hug the wall and aim in between these leaves like I did. All of these one ways and tripwires and cameras for B site are going to take a little bit of practice because they're all a little bit tricky. And now here's a one way for arcade. You're going to want to line up your UI with this little diagonal slant in the background like so. You can throw this one way on tower like this as well. And this is similar to the other one way I showed you on ropes. It's really good at holding the spot. As for camera spots, this one's great for watching B main because you can look through this little slit and this little beam here. And this one's pretty good for watching pushes coming from arcade. Just keep in mind, Cypher is great for gaining information, so you don't really need to play off your setups a whole lot. Don't overcomplicate things, just put your tripwires down and communicate to your team what you see and what you hear. Now on to what I consider to be Cypher's best map, and that's Split. This is because of all the narrow spaces and high levels of elevation where you can hide his camera. For pistol rounds, I prefer to put my camera here and call for early information, as well as line up this one way for A main. You line up your crosshair with the middle of this G in Kingdom and give it a toss. Pair that with a tripwire and it'll be extremely hard for the enemy team to hit A round 1. Usually if you're playing towards A site, Cypher will sometimes put a tripwire and ropes so that no one has to play there and can stack somewhere else. But if you're sure they're not going in events, here's a good few setups for A site. For this one, you want to throw these two tripwires and pair them with this one way. All of this can be tied together nicely with this camera. And once the enemy hits those tripwires, activate the one way and fire away. Another setup that you can use is that you throw these two tripwires, throw these two cages close to sight, and place your camera inside this glass room here. As of right now, this camera is basically indestructible, and it'll let you know when they're pushing the site. So be ready for a lot of chaos, as you're gonna have to use your cages and elbow itself for cover, as you're probably gonna be playing towards elbow or towards screens. Those setups should do a good job at holding A site, so now let's talk about B site. Here's a setup that every Cypher main should know, and it's super simple. Throw your camera high on this wall from off this box, put your tripwire in any of these spots honestly, but most important thing is that you want to throw these one-way cages. Use your camera to know when people are pushing the B site, activate the one-ways, and swing when you're ready. B site is super easy for Cypher to play. The site is super narrow, and people just can't worry about all these different types of tripwires as they're running through site. This is why most teams simply just try not to hit B site head on. There's so much to worry about, and honestly, it's not worth hitting the site unless you're splitting it from heaven. As for my favorite setup, you come over here and throw it on this tripwire. This one's tricky, so be sure to practice as you need to line it up with this little pebble on the ground. Also, I place a tripwire going across like this, and after that, I place a cage in the middle, so when I activate it, it hides both of them. Finally, jump on these boxes and throw your camera here. It basically serves the same purpose as the first camera, it's just that it's a lot harder for enemies to spot, and they need to be deeper into B main for them to see it. If you activate that same one way from the first setup, the enemies are going to think you're playing on pillar, when really you're going to be playing back sight. Just be sure that you have your teammates shoot any boombots or dogs that try to ruin your setups. Also, playing mid with Cypher isn't necessarily the greatest, but very quickly, here's some tripwires that you can throw up there. Now let's move on to bind. There are plenty of good tripwires and cameras to put in this map that it would take all day for us to go through them all, so I'll keep it simple with a few good setups. To start, let's go into hookah and throw this camera on the ceiling and this tripwire across the entrance. This tripwire is hard to shoot, and the camera is even harder to see as enemies literally have to look up at the sky in order to see it. You could pair this with another tripwire inside hookah and then throw this cage that will act as a one-way. Use your camera to judge when they make their way inside, and then activate your cage and spray at their toes. With this setup and a teammate holding your long, hookah is going to be near impossible to take. Let's move to the actual site now. This one's really good and you can play off it pretty safely in elbow. Start by lining up these two tripwires in the sand, and then place a cage at the entrance of elbow for your protection. Not only does it protect you, but you're going to be shooting through it as enemies run through your tripwires. Hop on a tube and throw your camera somewhere up high. This will help you listen for audio cues and let you know when they're starting their execute. For our last B setup, if you're on a Nick around and all you have is a judge or a specter, you really want to use this one. To start, place your camera up high on this wall like before, and place your tripwires guarding the entrance of 2. Place your cages here to protect yourself, and get ready to spray as they come onto sight. With a close range weapon, this setup should get you a ton of kills if they decide to push you. Let's move on over to A site, where there again are some awesome ways to hold this site. There's honestly so many good tripwires, but this one's really hard to shoot out if people are coming out of showers. Combine that with some of these, and your teammates are really going to appreciate you. Also, this camera high up in this vent is great at spotting out the site. Here's a setup that'll be great at holding lamps. First, throw this tripwire. Next, come over to the teleporter. This is where it gets tricky, so pay attention. Line up your abilities HUD with this black bar line up to the edge of this triangle, and then angle your crosshair so that it matches up with that small white bar, and boom, you have a one-way for teleporter. Next, throw your next tripwire off this metal sheet. After that, come into lamps, aim at this wood beam, with your back up against the wall, and then aim at the left of this lamp and give it a toss. You now have a one-way for lamps. Change up these setups from round to round, and your defense is going to be super hard to stop on bind. For our next map, it's going to be Ascent, and Cypher has some pretty crazy setups. Most Cypher mains throw a tripwire going across like this, which is just super hard to shoot and super annoying. But you could throw a tripwire off the bricks at like a bunch of different angles, and honestly, they'll be pretty annoying. Next, throw your other tripwire on the floor, like this, or on the corner of the door, like so. Most people immediately path towards the switch, so they'll surely catch somebody. Place your cage here so you can play towards backside safely and spray through the cage. Next, line up with this crack in the stairs and aim at the line in the wall, and throw your cage for a nasty one-way for anybody trying to push out of A main. Finally, throw your camera somewhere up high and near this pipe so they can barely see a sliver into A main. It also sees in the garden and tells you when people are executing on site. If you want to try playing retake on A, or if you want to play catwalk yourself, this is going to be a good setup. Line up with this third line in the wall, aim at the corner, and toss this one way. Next, you're going to want to come into garden and toss this camera at a spot when you should pop your one way. If you place both your tripwires on A site like I showed you before, you can shoot enemies as they come through the smoke that usually block the door. Another setup is you start by placing a tripwire somewhere in front of A main, like I showed you before. Your camera goes on the same spot on the wall. Now come into garden and place down this tripwire. Then you come into this corner, you aim at this leaf, and then throw this one-way cage. Now if they push garden onto A site, they can't come onto site without pushing your one way. Now let's work our way over to mid. I like throwing my camera up on this wall, and you start by jumping on these barrels. For some reason, I don't know why, just people don't shoot it out. Pair that tripwire going across mid, and you could have your teammates play more towards sites and leave mid open, and this camera gets you a ton of information. On pistol round, I think B site is where Cypher should be playing. In the buy round, jump up and throw your camera in this window. Pair this camera with the tripwire in the corner of this wall. Next, walk up to the top of the stairs, put yourself into this corner, and aim at this black dot on this island. Throw your cage, and this will be an awesome one-way for anybody pushing out of B main. When the buy barrier goes down, immediately use your camera for instant information. This can allow you to either flank fast or call for early rotates from your teammates. B site has a ton of great tripwires to throw down, so honestly, you can throw down any of these and they'd work fine. One tripwire that I like is across the door from mid, and it's sort of near their feet. If you pair this up with a one-way cage, which really doesn't have a lineup, just toss it from this corner, it's pretty lenient. And if you're playing stairs, B is going to be really annoying to take from mid. As for other camera spots, either of these two work really well for B site. Alright, so now let's move on to a map that Cypher isn't that great on, but he could still work, and that's Icebox. He can watch flanks pretty well, but he's really limited when it comes up to switching up his setups. So let's start on A site where his camera can get insane value. Practice this jump on top of screens, and throw it up high on this wall. It almost never gets shot out, and it tells you when they're pushing the site. Pair that with a tripwire on each side of maze, and A site's going to be really annoying to push. And extra bonus points if you can catch somebody with this tripwire on the zipline. Also, on A site, any of these tripwires work. You just need to be quick because people just love to run it up A, and they might catch you while you're setting up. Also, you can throw this one way from rafters, and this one's kind of tricky. You need to line up the bottom left of your HUD like so, and also you need to line up the lights on that nest with the top of 410 and give it a toss. Now let's talk about mid. Cypher is pretty good at holding kitchen, as all he has to do is throw a tripwire like this and potentially next to boiler, and this will tell your team to get ready to get pinched from mid. You can also throw your camera out for early information again for early flanks, which can be huge. Finally, on B side, there aren't many setups to do here, but a couple nice cameras are on this wall, and then another one is you jump up on this box and fade away while looking at the wall, and slap your camera up high. Both of these cameras give you pretty decent information on B main. Just be sure not to tag anybody or make too much noise, otherwise they probably will get shot out. The two main tripwires you're going to throw are on both sides of yellow. With these two tripwires, you can throw cages on them and activate them and isolate 1v1s when they get close, and this makes B site super hard to take for enemies. Last but not least, let's talk about the newest map in the game, and that's Breeze. Cypher, in my opinion, is super underrated on this map, and honestly, he's pretty good at watching flanks and has some pretty interesting setups. On A site, you can throw down these two tripwires, one off the concrete blocks and then one off the wall to make a pretty nasty cross. Pair this with a camera in any of these spots, and A main is going to be super hard to push. If you've been having trouble with halls, the setup is going to be a good way to stop any aggression. So before the barrier drops, throw this cage and line it up like I am. Open the door and toss your camera like so, and on your camera's contact, activate the one way and you'll be shooting at everybody's toes. If they like going through double doors, you can throw out one way in this small cubby and put a tripwire going across the entrance. And if you play behind Tetris, you're good for at least 2 if they're coming up from mid. If you're running this setup, just throw one tripwire across the bricks from A main, and that'll suffice. Now let's move over to B side. If you want to play more for B main, you can throw your tripwires off the pillar or off the wall like so. Line up with this spot in the wall, line up like this, and throw a cage for a nasty one-way on pillar. This will be great for anybody trying to wrap you on B site. And as for camera spots, you can place the cameras in these 2 spots. You'll be able to see anybody coming from tunnels or B main. And if you want to play more towards mid, come over to these bricks, crouch in this corner, and look at this spot in the ceiling. This will create a one-way for anybody pushing through tunnels. After that, place this tripwire across the bricks, and you're good to go. And remember guys, if you want to learn the rest of the agents in the game and learn how to use their utility to its fullest potential, be sure to check out SkillCapped.com, link in the description below. I hope this video helped you guys learn how to play Cypher a bit better. He has a ton of potential with his utility and can be, honestly, a bit daunting to play sometimes. He's a ton of fun, especially when they push your sites though. Hopefully we convince you guys to pick him up in the future. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel down below. It really does help us out. And that's all for us. I'm Teets, and we here at SkillCapped want to thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.